got the touch. You got the power.
Thank you, Renee, for the, I don't know if I'm on. Okay. Thanks, Renee, for the amazing, okay. All right, guys. Thank you, Renee, for the incredible opportunity to present here. We're extremely flattered. Right now, what we're going to do is, this is an exercise in sharing. So you guys open your bags, obviously. You're supposed to share the beer between you and your neighbor. And don't be greedy. Try your hardest not to drink all the beer. You can sip on it, but just save one last drink, because at the end we're going to do a little demo. So feel free to sip on it throughout our presentation. It may make it a little easier for you to digest. You can lose it. Okay. So again, thanks guys for this. This is an amazing opportunity. We're extremely flattered to be here. 4 years ago, Anthony and I were both just line cooks in San Francisco. The fact that we're here in front of like an amazing and such prestigious audience today definitely deserves a bit of explaining. So I'll start by, obviously the two of us have put in a few hours of work here and there, but honestly, we really are very blessed and chanced ourselves into a style of restaurant that fulfills two types of appetite. Obviously, like anyone else, we're trying to fulfill the appetite of the customer and make delicious food that satiates that appetite. But also, we're trying to fulfill another kind of appetite, and that's the appetite for a meaningful experience. The audacity of hope refers to a phrase popularized by President Obama. And while it may seem a little bit, over serious right now, we think that it really captures something in the spirit of our endeavors, as well as a time and place. So we'd like to tell you a little bit about ourselves, and in doing so, elaborate on these two types of appetite and how they fit together. Anthony and I have come an extremely long way together, but it all began with an appetite that Anthony had. So without further ado, Anthony Myint.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again to Renee and all of the staff for putting together such a wonderful event and really welcoming us and making us feel at home here. Before I get started, I just want to say that we'll be delivering or distributing kind of a small hors d'oeuvre of cucumber dressed in kind of a tahini sauce with Szechuan peppercorn on top. I guess we'd ask that
Yeah, just, if you can wait, don't eat.
Yeah, maybe hang on to that for a minute and we'll describe it later. You should feel free to have a sip of your beer, but maybe save a little bit of it for the end. So, as Danny said, we'll tell you a little bit about our story and hopefully tie it back into appetite as much as possible. In 2008, I was a line cook in San Francisco. I worked at a pretty good restaurant, and I really liked the chef, Jason Fox, and I loved the camaraderie with the other cooks and the daily grind. I'd been there for a couple of years, and I worked my way through all of the stations, and like I said, I really enjoyed it, but I kind of wasn't that interested in the traditional career path, like from line cook to sous chef. to chef de cuisine. To be completely honest, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do next. As I often do in such moments of uncertainty, I'm sorry about that. These are some of the themes that we'll be going over. On the left are the themes, and on the right are kind of like the chapters of the presentation. As you can see, we're basically covering two types of appetite, kind of that for a good story and a meaningful experience, and that for good food. So as I was saying, as I often do in such moments of uncertainty, I ate a taco. The Mission District of San Francisco is a lively mix of Latin American and young hipster cultures. It has a good reputation for Mexican food, at least within the US. Standing there, holding a taco on the street corner, I started talking with the Guatemalan couple who owned the truck, and I asked them about maybe could I rent the truck on my day off and possibly serve different food there. I had no idea at the time that something momentous was happening. They agreed, and I spent the next couple weeks kind of developing a recipe for a special flatbread, since all they had was a small griddle. I would serve some gourmet tacos, I guess. My wife and I planned on just spending our evening hanging out in the truck and chatting, which was actually kind of a rarity, as you know, from like a cook's schedule. We definitely did not expect to be very busy. The project, which began as basically a whim, turned into something much bigger. What we didn't realize was that food had entered sort of an information age, and food writers were hungry for a story like ours. The idea of a line cook serving upscale food from a taco truck resonated with the blogosphere. It catered to the natural human appetite for a good story. Before we set foot in the truck for the first time, there was already a line of customers waiting, which you can imagine is extremely nerve-wracking.
Is it as nerve-wracking as this, or this is pretty nerve-wracking?
Yeah, it was more nerve-wracking than this. So we got in the truck, and we scrambled to get set up and turn out food as fast as we could while maintaining a semblance of professionalism. But truth be told, it was kind of a shit show.
Hopefully this is not going to be a shit show.
Or hopefully it's one that has a happy ending.
Yeah.
The next week, we spent the whole week preparing kind of after work and before work and stuff like that. And though we were more prepared, there were more customers. And so again, it was kind of a shit show. And things sort of just went like that for a while. Until ultimately, a contentious neighbor forced us off the street corner, and we had to find a new home. So we went door to door in the Mission, and this is where we ended up. A rundown Chinese restaurant called Lung Shan. It was on kind of a questionable stretch of Mission Street, and honestly, there were not very many customers at night. So we talked to the owners about maybe could we rent your space? Could we rent your kitchen and dining room for each Thursday? And this conversation was had in kind of broken Cantonese. So the owners deliberated for a minute and kind of wrapped their head around the idea of turning over their kitchen and dining room to basically a complete stranger serving different food, and they agreed. So we paid them $300 a night and rented their kitchen and dining room, and the only condition was that they had to be allowed to continue doing their takeout business during our dinner service.
Which is interesting.
Of course, we did not invent the idea of underground supper clubs or pop-up restaurants, as they've come to be known. But in 2008, the concept was pretty new in San Francisco, and the idea spoke to a lot of things that were circulating at the moment. It was the height of the financial meltdown, and I think people sort of liked the story of like an underdog or like a little guy starting a restaurant with no startup capital. Fortunately, the appetite for a good story that brought people to the truck in the first place continued to bring people to the restaurant in droves. We had started a restaurant that sort of fulfilled my interest for an unconventional career path, and also diners' interests for sort of appetite for a new experience. But the project also had potential to fulfill an appetite of, kind of a long-term appetite of mine to do kind of a social good. I was an economics major in college, and though I forgot almost everything I learned, I did internalize some things, and I kind of had a sense that the restaurant industry was an opportunity to do something good for the community, that eating out is ultimately basically just a luxury. No one has to eat out. It's a discretionary use of disposable income. So, as a chef or restaurateur, that there was an opportunity here to basically, make your food slightly more appealing, and you could charge an extra 50 cents or $1 and then donate that dollar to charity. Mission Street Food at that time was just a hobby, and so we didn't really care about the bottom line. So we made sort of a bold decision to just donate all of our profits to charity. In addition to being kind of a good story, like for the press. Thanks. In addition to being kind of a good story for the press, it also, I think, fulfilled customers' appetites to tell kind of a good story about themselves as consumers. We also invited local chefs to come cook half the menu as guest chefs. So they would, choose a theme or a cuisine, and we would kind of work things out with them, and we would serve the other half of the menu. That meant radical changes in the menu each night, from things like modern Portuguese food to silly theme nights like fancy McDonald's, or flat out weird stuff like Mediterranean food.
There's a stoner food night, too.
At this point, I had already stopped working at Bar Tartine, and many thanks to Jason Fox for letting me use his kitchen and only complaining a little bit about it. But I had already stopped working at Bar Tartine, and we had started doing Mission Street Food twice a week. So each week was basically like an endless nightmare of logistical, issues. But at the same time, it provided like an incredible opportunity for learning. We got to see what ingredients and flavor combinations any given chef was interested in. We got to see, how 100 different people created a menu and set up stations and, worked with their cooks. So while we had stumbled into a way to kind of feed people's appetite for new experiences, I think what was really important was that we kind of created or fed like cooks' appetite for community. This is also how I first met Danny.
So I'd heard about Mission Street Food, as a cook in a restaurant. Cooks talk, oftentimes too much. But they basically, I'd heard about Mission Street Food from some friends, and I heard it was kind of like crazy, and you could go stand in line for an hour and drink beer on the street, which ultimately I think is why they had to move out of the taco truck. So I'd heard about it on the internet, but from other cooks, and upon first glance, it was really that's actually nicer than it looks whenever we moved in. But I kind of like had to throw everything, any pretense I had about like restaurants and whatever else out the window and go into this situation as like, look, it's just like kind of like a dive bar. It's kind of like a party. We have to clean it up. But again, it was like we're sharing it with the owners of the restaurant. So it's like if you're staying at someone's house, you can't go in and be like, hey, I'm gonna just move your couch. Like we had to finesse our way into like, maybe we should replace this or that. But it was an insanely good opportunity because as a cook, you can go in and have complete creative freedom, and you're gonna be cooking for a packed house every night. There were like 3-hour waits. So like, you'd be setting up at 6 o'clock, and there'd be a line wrapped completely down the block around the corner. And no one even knew what the menu was gonna be. People just were interested in this weird thing that was happening. Like Anthony, I've been working as a cook, a sous chef, chef de cuisine, but I wasn't sure how I was gonna continue my career path because I didn't really wanna work for like, a big restaurant anymore. So Anthony convinced me to eventually do my own guest chef night, which were followed by many more. And then, what was cool is after work, cooks would come by and visit to see what the chef that evening had done. And it was kind of like, careful there. It was kind of like building a community of cooks and chefs. And, our industry it's riddled with, one-upsmanship and like, competition, which is good and it drives us. But it was cool to be under this, like, it was an unpretentious Chinese restaurant where like some of the best chefs in the city were coming and like drinking beers and like asking if we could make them Chinese food, which we didn't know how to make at the time. So it was really, really awesome. I eventually became co-chef of Mission Mission Street Food. And Anthony and I pushed ourselves because we didn't have a teacher at that point besides the guest chefs that were coming in. And you have a guest chef coming in to cook a menu and they can choose the theme. You don't want to look bad, so we would obviously push ourselves to become better. The whole experience definitely fed my appetite for creativity, both in terms of making up the dishes, but also in terms of being resourceful. It was a 180-degree turn from the restaurants we'd been working in. Each night we'd face insane hang-ups, we had to work where, failure was maybe an option, and we had to be outside of our comfort zones and adapt. Mission Street Food had been operating for about over a year and a half. While we were still learning from other cooks that would come in, being around all these chefs, we'd always ask them, like, what chef are you most excited about? With special apologies to Pascal Barbeau and René Redzepi and Michel Brad and Yaki. What happened was we were like, let's start doing homage dinners and like let's cook the food that we're excited about, and maybe hopefully we can make it almost as good as just that. So we would spend the whole week like dorking out on blogs and like asking people that maybe had staged at this restaurant or this or that how they did stuff, and we still don't know how to make this stuff. But we were very naive and excited, and I feel like the public really caught on to that. Like there were 4 of us in the kitchen, and we'd be trying to plate up like gargilou, and then like, again, the Chinese restaurant was still functioning, so sometimes they would actually get like a delivery order that was big. So you're trying to make this composed dish, and then the Chinese chef just comes over and like bumps you off and dumps like 80 egg rolls in the deep fryer. And so like, what are you gonna do? So that being said, there were many compromises. We learned to like put binchotan inside of a wok and put a lid on top of it, put a grate on top, and use that as like a robata. We were like holding, poulet and bessie in like a rice warmer in stock, and then we would steam it in that rice warmer. So it was a really insane experience. Eventually, we just asked ourselves, why don't we just use the wok as a wok? We'd always eaten Chinese food on our days off. Mission Street Food was coming to an end, so we're like, let's just make Chinese food. Anthony speaks Cantonese. I don't speak any Chinese at all. So he was our liaison to the owners all the time. He was like, look, Danny wants to make Chinese food. And I think they said something like, he's an idiot, but. So they just watched me fail a lot, a million times. But eventually, as a cook, you just, you adapt and you make it happen. So it was a lot of trial and error. Unlike Mission Street Food, we could develop the dishes over time because it was the same menu constantly. So we'd like to talk now, finally, about appetite for food. We'll start with a quick demonstration. The sizzling cumin lamb dish is probably one of the oldest tricks in the book. Is it hot? If hopefully this sizzles. But put meat or anything onto a hot platter, like the egg at Noma, or like fajitas at a Tex-Mex restaurant. It really appeals to your senses, both visually, and you smell it, you see it. Every time we send one of these dishes out in the dining room, people are like, what's that? And then we like sell, like, if we send one out, we fire 6 because we know we're gonna sell a ton of them. But it's not, for what it is, it's just like, that's how we kind of trigger certain things. For us, cooking at Mission Chinese Food is like, we try to coax the most out of something because we have the least, our restaurant's just a crappy Chinese restaurant. And same with spicy dishes too. Like we'll start and we'll know that mapo tofu is a spicy stewed pork and tofu dish. We just try to take our technique that we've learned in the past and how do we make it better? How can we make it as good as, if not better? So Anthony's gonna talk about spice a little bit.
Sorry, I guess, can we cue the next slide? Maybe we can get back to the cooking demo afterwards. So, speaking of a spicy dish like mapo tofu, the food at Mission Chinese Food is legitimately spicy, kind of unlike sort of what you see in a lot of fine dining. A lot of people complain that it's too spicy. The word piquant comes from the French for piquer, French piquer, to prick, and it refers to kind of the pleasantly painful sensation of capsaicin registering on the tongue. I guess spice has demonstrable physiological effects, the first of which is kind of on the trigeminal nerve in the palate, sort of changing the way that we perceive different textures and flavors. And then also, because you're actually talking about the body coping with pain, there's the release of endorphins, and those are shown to stimulate and increase appetite. From kind of a bigger picture, like macroeconomic perspective or something, I think in like Europe and the United States, traditionally there has not been that much spice in the diet, but in the rest of the world there's really a lot of spice, and I think that we're seeing now sort of like a globalization where, you know, as people become more familiar with like Thai food and Indian food and Szechuan food, not only are they just more interested in spicy food, but they're also sort of like building up a tolerance for spice. So you see this in the market at all kinds of levels, from like, you know, chocolates with chili in them to the British supermarket chain Tesco, which released the Nata Jolokia pepper, and on the first morning, they pretty much sold out of a whole month's supply.
I'll just touch briefly on Szechuan peppercorns, and if you guys haven't already eaten your cucumbers, you can eat them now. The cucumbers are just, they're a tiny bit of Szechuan pepper, and you may not notice it at first, but Harold McGee describes the sensation of Szechuan pepper as like a numbing, strange, tingling, buzzing sensation. And you'll notice it kind of, once you start to feel that, if you do feel that, it'll make your beer taste differently. That's why I said save your beer. Give it a few seconds to kick in. That definitely counters in Szechuan cooking, like the spice. It's like the ma and la. Ma means numbing and la means spicy. It's the hardest thing to do in the world, to make insanely spicy food but make it balanced.
So overtime?
We're definitely not serving authentic Chinese food at Mission Chinese, but it is an authentic experience. I think that we talked about it earlier, that Renee touched on, but our prices are extremely low. And it's really interesting because we have like food critics, like cooks, families, Chinese families, all eating in the same restaurant, catering to not one demographic, but every demographic. And in doing so, we're able to donate 75 cents from each entree to charity. In the last 2 years, we've donated over $130,000 to San Francisco Food Bank. And that's, you know. Thank you. In New York, we're doing the same thing. We just opened like a month ago. Every day we come to work, and it's extremely rewarding. It's a rewarding community, like familial community kind of feeling to come into. We're going to show you a short video to give you an idea of the restaurant that we work in and the kind of atmosphere we try to create. Okay. Yes. I will be dining here.
Okay, good. Well, there's enough water for you. This your Chinese food?
This is the owner.
Yeah.
And the delivery
Give me a phone number. Uh-huh. 994 236 yellow. Come for me. Uh-huh. Thank you. Bye.
So during the lunch break every day, the Chinese cooks, they all will play mahjong, and we'll make a big staff meal and everyone will eat together. And our cooks will go get coffee or, talk to their wives on the phone for a few hours. And then they'll play mahjong. And I don't know how to play, luckily, because I think that sometimes money's involved.
Whoever's not playing is usually taking a nap somewhere.
Yeah, we have like a nap area downstairs in the basement. So this is the owner's mother. She insists on waiting tables at lunch still, which is It's good. It's charming, but I feel it's pretty funny. It's pretty funny. This is Jesse's arm. This is Jesse. So he's the chef in San Francisco now. We've cooked together over 10 years at like 19 different restaurants, but definitely one of my best friends as well. This is me and my hair. So this is T-Bone and Lole. These two guys we hired after the first night of being open. Anthony and I completely shit the bed, and like we were not able to do it by ourselves, so we called a hotline, and the two Chinese cooks showed up, and they never cooked before. But that was good, because you don't want like a Chinese chef being like, well, you're making this completely wrong. So they, we've trained them over the last, 2 years, and they're amazing cooks. So this is kind of like dinner service. It gets really crazy at night. It's like 3-hour waits, but again, it's like a really laid-back environment. It's kind of like you're going to like your friend's barbecue or something, only it's Chinese.
What's interesting about that hallway there is, as you can see here, there's kind of like a pass where there's a lot of food coming out of the kitchen, and on the other side there's sort of like a to-go packaging area, and like when the camera zooms out, there's like this crazy frenetic traffic jam of like, people running food, people packaging food, like customers walking through to go to the bathroom, and like it's total chaos, which is kind of fun.
We made like a hand-pulled noodle station up front because there weren't enough rooms for seats in the front. So we make hand-pulled noodles there, or we used to. I'm not. That's a great shot. So I'm going to show you a short video of New York now. We just opened New York, and we got to open the same idea, but we got to actually make a kitchen that was functional, and we would not have been able to do it without a lot of chefs that are actually in this room right now that have helped us. So at the end of the day, we're just trying to make a memorable experience and exciting food that appeals to people's appetite for fun. It's a lot of fun. You can play the video. All right, we're running low on time, so Anthony's going to close it out. That's my ideal restaurant. He's going to talk about his ideal restaurant now.
So I wanted to close briefly on the topic of the ideal restaurant. A couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of hearing Rene speak in support of his book, and he said something which, it wasn't the focus of his book, but it really made an impression on me. He said he wished that he did not have to charge money. Rene's probably had 10 better ideas since breakfast, but again, it really just made an impression on me because if you think about it, restaurants are fundamentally capitalistic endeavors. A restaurant has to operate as a business. If it fails as a business, it's going to fail as a restaurant. So I thought it kind of made me think about what would make an ideal restaurant, like how we could transcend kind of the economics of the restaurant industry, or maybe transcend capitalism altogether. And so we have plenty of restaurants now that source great ingredients from farms, but maybe could we see farms opening restaurants? At Mission Chinese Food, as Danny said, we donate a few cents to the San Francisco Food Bank for each entree. That's a really small gesture. Could we see food banks opening their own restaurants that would operate as daily fundraisers? And without getting into the details too much, they would have great advantages from like subsidized labor or donated food, as well as offering like a really meaningful experience to people. Or taking that example like even further, could governments open restaurants? I mean, we see, museums dedicated to the proliferation of the aesthetic arts, but really, apart from like incredible gatherings like this, we don't really see like dedicated forums for the advancement of, the culinary arts out beyond capitalist endeavors, basically. So ultimately, we recognize that Mission Chinese food is not the ideal restaurant like this. But I think that it demonstrates that there's a real appetite for the audacious, and that it provides real hope that anybody could start a restaurant, or hope that anybody could turn any restaurant into a special one, or real hope that somehow through events like this we could create like a real community amongst cooks and chefs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Should we stand on front of the kitchen, because then everybody can see how you're dressed? And Rene reckons you've got the prize for the best dressed speaker.
Well, thank you. It was hot here yesterday.
That was just wonderful, and I think everybody is going to feel that you not only talked, but you demonstrated, and you filled the tent with beautiful, beautiful smells, and you filled our mouths with beautiful tastes. So thank you so much. And where is our first question going to come from? Over here? Yeah.
Hi. Thank you for your wonderful presentation and inspiring the involvement of the community and also inspiring the community.
Thank you.
I was wondering, you started this in San Francisco with the community and friends, and how are you doing this in New York? Are you you are going to both work there, or how is this going to work in New York? Since you are out of the other community, are you going to try and get something similar?
Yeah. So basically, we're both. We saved a lot of money, and we're in a lot of debt now. But we have the restaurant in New York, and it's only been open a month. I go back and forth. Anthony is there all the time. He lives in San Francisco, and then our chef, really honestly, Jesse. He's been making the food for like the last year and a half with me, but I can do things like that because he's such an amazing chef and he's always there. So through our working relationship of working over 10 years, we just think alike, and we just know, like I know I can trust him. But yeah, I go back to Mission Chinese food once a month, back and forth from New York to there. And once New York gets up and running, maybe back in San Francisco a little bit more, but we're trying to open a few more locations soon. So.
Okay, any more questions? Any more? Yes, question over here.
I think your use of social media obviously is really clever. In the end, what do you think was more important, the good story or the food, or perhaps it's a sense of community?
I think it's really all of the above. As you can tell, Danny's kind of a free spirit, but he's also like an incredibly, incredibly talented chef. In 2008 or something, 2007, I think he went to Italy and his chef got too drunk, so he had to compete in the World Championship of Pesto. It was an amazing story because here's like an adopted Korean American from Oklahoma in Genoa competing in the World Series or the World Championship of Pesto, and he wins it.
I won.
And then he's also worked in sushi restaurants, working his way up from like a rice washer to cutting fish, etc. And like Italian, fine dining, you name it. So the food is definitely like legitimate and very important. But as we're saying, I think that a big part of the success was these other aspects, like the community, the goodwill, and the interesting story.
And now I can wear shorts, which is better.
Okay, we have time for one more last question.
I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about something you said earlier, that you're not really cooking anything anyone might recognize as Chinese food. I'll make that statement, but you're serving a very authentic experience, and if you could talk a little bit about what you mean by that.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I think we'll touch on music. I always make references to music as well. It's like when your favorite band releases an album that they're just insanely excited about, or maybe it's their first album. That's what we strive for. It's just that sense of personality that comes through the food. And then if you're an amazing band like the Beastie Boys or Radiohead, you can continue with that same tone and evolve. And what we're trying to do is offer an experience that is fun and that isn't, it's just different. And if we're excited about it, and if it's a food that we want to eat on our day off, that's going to translate. And if some people like it, a lot of people don't like it sometimes, but at the end of the day, we're happy with what we're putting out, and that's what we think is the authenticity of the experience, in that we're not we're not doing something because we necessarily have to. We're not making a roast chicken because our chef, the owner, wants a roast chicken on the menu. We're getting to make weird Chinese food that's not necessarily authentic, but it's all derived from an amazing Chinese dish.
I think also basically the food is delicious and involves fine dining techniques or different things, and so it's really kind of bottom up food where we're not trying to make it over fancy, but we are incorporating technique almost as a fusion of techniques instead of ingredients. So it's not traditional Chinese food, because in traditional Chinese food they would use crappy meat and MSG and stuff like that. But it is traditional in the sense that it's kind of staying true to the identities of the dishes. I mean, not every dish, but a lot of them.
Okay, for a fabulous demonstration of cooking, but also talking about compassion, community, creativity, Mission Street Chinese.